Hi guys, Kenna here, and I hope you're doing well. So the notes for today are going to go ahead and go over ATP, ADP, and cell energy. Now, the cool thing about today's notes is that we're going to start examining the energy that you actually use to do all the things that you do on a regular basis. So when you walk, talk, think, and blink, where does that energy actually come from? Now, your first response, I know, is going to be to say, comes from the food you eat, and you're not wrong, but we can't use that energy directly. If we did, then we'd probably be eating all the time. So let's go ahead and take a look at today's essential questions. Number one, what is the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs? Now, some of you might remember this from middle school, and if that's true, great. But auto, that prefix meaning self, and hetero, that prefix meaning different, autotrophs and heterotrophs. What do we mean here? Number two, how are ATP and ADP different? So there's got to be a reason for the difference in the acronym. Let's go ahead and figure out what those stand for and how your body uses them. And number three, how are ATP and ADP used in cell energy? Since today is over cell energy, it makes some sense that these two key molecules we're going to highlight are somehow related to that process of cell energy. Now, before we jump right in and start giving you some definitions and start looking at the actual process by which your body manufactures these, I want you to kind of think about some situation you might have in your own life. Let's suppose that you earn extra money by having a part time job. At first, you're probably tempted to go ahead and spend all of that money, but then you decide to go ahead and open a bank account. Now, when you do that, what are the benefits of having a bank account? Two, what do you do if you need to get some money out of that bank account? Three, what might your body do when it has more energy than it needs to carry out its activities? And four, what do you think your body does when it needs energy? So go ahead and take a minute, pause the video, and think about why we save money. And then try and compare that to why your body might save energy and what it does to go ahead and do that. So pause the video here, and when you've answered these questions, keep going. All right, so hopefully you've thought about it for a while, and you realize that by putting your money in the bank account, it's safe and it's protected for when you need it later. And this is especially true if you don't need the money right now. Let's say you want to save up to buy a new bicycle, or you guys are getting old enough, maybe you're saving up to go ahead and buy your first car. Okay. It's probably best not to go ahead and freeze it in your freezer or go ahead and stuff it under your mattress because then it's not really protected. But we go ahead and put it in a bank so it's safe and maybe even going to earn some interest. So, what might your body do that's kind of similar to this when it comes to its energy needs? You eat food, and what does it do with that energy? Because when you're sitting there eating it, you probably don't have super high energy needs. But then if you go for exercise later, you go for a run or something, okay? Now your body needs more energy, but you're not eating at that moment. So what does your body do when it needs energy? If you remember your physics, energy is the ability to do work. And nearly every activity that you perform requires work. And as such, you need energy to function. So we have to think about where that energy comes from and how our body accesses it when it needs it. Now, these terms of autotroph and heterotroph are things that you've probably heard before. These are probably things you were introduced to in middle school at some point. You also probably were told that at some point, all of the energy on our planet came either directly or indirectly from the sun. And that's true. Now, plants and other organisms that are able to do photosynthesis capture that energy from the sun and convert it into sugars, glucose in particular, that we then go ahead and use as a food. Now, glucose is a sugar, is one of our carbohydrates that we hopefully remember talking about at the beginning of this term. These organisms that are able to produce their own food using the sun are called autotrophs. Now, there are a small subset of other types of autotrophs, and we may talk about those later. But for now, know that those photosynthetic organisms are known as autotrophs. Auto coming from self, troph meaning feeder. So, autotroph self feeders. Organisms that obtain their energy from the foods they eat, they can't produce their own food, are called heterotrophs. So hetero means different, troph, feeder. So they feed on different sources. Okay, they're going to eat different animals or eat different plants, but they don't get their energy directly from the sun. Now, I have a quick little video I'm going to go ahead and show you that talks a little bit about energy and energy flow, and then we'll go ahead and pick up from here.
The total amount of energy in the universe remains constant. It can change from one form or state to another, but it can never be lost, and no new energy can be made. However, when energy is converted from one form to another, some is converted into heat and becomes unavailable to do work. This is why all living organisms require a constant energy input, and why we need to eat every day. The flow of energy within an organism consists of millions of precisely regulated chemical reactions inside the cells. During these chemical reactions, complex molecules are broken down into simpler molecules, or simple ones are built up into more complex molecules. Every reaction involves a transfer of energy between molecules. Reactions that release energy by breaking down chemical bonds are called exergonic reactions, or energy out. And those that consume energy by building chemical bonds are called endergonic reactions, or energy in. Exergonic reactions are happening in the bodies of these basketball players. Chemical reactions are going on in their muscle cells, which release the energy that contracts their muscles and propels them. The heat that their bodies give off is another form of energy and a byproduct of those reactions. Endergonic reactions put molecules together to build muscles, bones, and other cells. The growing process is an obvious example. Cells also constantly need energy to repair damage and reproduce. These are endergonic processes. These types of reactions require an input of energy. Exergonic reactions release energy, and endergonic reactions consume energy. The two are part of a coordinated energy flow in which the energy released during one reaction helps to fuel the opposite reaction.
Okay, so we saw that this ties back to what we talked about earlier about chemical reactions and building up and breaking apart molecules. Now, remember that that energy is stored inside the bonds that hold those atoms together. So when we build a molecule, we're actually storing energy in those bonds. So as we go on to talk about ATP and ADP today, keep that in mind as we're thinking about where we're storing energy. So activities in the cell are powered by chemical fuels. Okay, think of yourself as a giant bag of chemical reactions, and all of those chemical reactions take place in the water primarily of your body. And the fuels that our body are going to use come in the form of ATP. So what does ATP stand for? Adenosine triphosphate. A, adenosine, T, triphosphate, P. Okay. And when we use that energy, I don't want to say waste product because it still has energy stored in it, but the spent version is ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. The characteristics of the ATP molecule make it really good at storing and releasing energy at a moment's notice for all of these different things that our body needs to accomplish at the drop of a hat. Okay. Now, your cells get their basic energy from this ATP. It's not directly from the sandwich you had for lunch or the egg you had for breakfast. That egg or sandwich is digested, broken down, and used to build up ATP molecules that your body can use when it needs the actual energy. So, let's talk in a little video here about the different types of energy molecules we're going to be dealing with.
All organisms require energy, but the rate that they need it can vary considerably. When we are sleeping or sitting around, our energy needs are low. But when we are playing sports or working, our energy needs are high. Cells have evolved a way to store energy, so it is available when needed. The primary way that cells supply energy at a moment's notice is via a high-energy molecule called ATP, Adenosine Triphosphate. ATP is a molecule containing adenosine and 3 phosphate groups. It is the phosphates that contain the high-energy bonds. The phosphate bonds require very little activation to be broken, and when they are broken, they release a great deal of energy. When enzymes catalyze an endergonic reaction, simple molecules are chemically joined to create a product of more complex molecules. ATP supplies the energy required to drive the reaction. This is how ATP provides the energy. The bond that links the last phosphate group to the rest of the ATP molecule is broken off, releasing the needed energy. The ATP molecule is changed in the process to become ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, and a phosphate group. When enzymes are catalyzing an exergonic reaction, the chemical bonds of the substrates are broken, releasing energy which is captured, putting the ADP and phosphate back together to reconstitute the ATP molecule. Cells always have a store of ATP, ADP, and phosphate groups on hand. This is a highly efficient cyclical process where ATP, ADP, and phosphate are constantly being recycled, capturing, carrying, and releasing energy. These chains of reactions constantly move, store, and free the energy needed to perform the vital activities of life.
Okay, so while I recognize that that video is a little on the older side, it does a really good job of kind of summarizing the basic ideas of what we need to take away in terms of cell energy. Now, hopefully you remember too that most of this is going to be taking place in the cell at the organelle known as the powerhouse of the cell. So does everybody remember what is the powerhouse of the cell? That's right. It's at the mitochondria. So most of this chemical reaction process where we're converting ADP into ATP to use at a moment's notice is taking place at the mitochondria. So as we start talking about chemical energy, we need to recognize these two molecules. First, the ATP molecule. Now, we talked before about how carbohydrates are this short term energy source versus fats or lipids, which are more of a long term energy source. But again, in reality, the energy that you use to walk, talk, think, and blink comes from the ATP molecule, which simply gets charged back up from your ADP and the energy from the food you eat. So, this is your real short source of short term energy. The TP portion stands for triphosphate, which means there are 3 phosphate groups, one, two, three, attached to the adenosine molecule. This energy then is released when we break the bond between the second and third phosphate group. Remember, the bonds are where we go ahead and store that energy. When we break that last phosphate group off, we are left with the ADP molecule. Now you got to think of this kind of like the spent fuel. Okay. So we have energy still stored in there, especially in the bond between the first and second phosphate group, but it's not as easy to get at and has a higher activation energy in order to release. In this case, the DP stands for diphosphate, so we'll have two phosphate groups instead of the three we see with ATP. So here's our cycle that we're going to go ahead and look at. ATP is used by your cells to power some activity, walk, talk, think, and blink, or all those thousands and thousands of chemical reactions that take place at the cellular level. When this happens, the ATP molecule breaks the bond between the second and third phosphate and becomes the ADP molecule. That ADP is then going to be sent to the mitochondria, remember the powerhouse of the cell, and recycled by reattaching that last phosphate group to create more ATP. Okay. In order to do this, the mitochondria is going to need oxygen and glucose to power the recycling process. This is where we're going to go ahead and tie in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Okay. So that's what we're going to go ahead and cover starting Thursday and Friday, but this is where all this ties back in together. So I really want you to think about ATP and ADP, this kind of relationship, like a rechargeable battery. When you're fully charged and ready to go, you're an ATP molecule. When you use that energy to perform some sort of chemical reaction or action within the body, you're expending some of that energy. There's still energy in it, but we're going to instead recharge it because we all know that our batteries work better when they're fully charged. Okay, so again, ADP, adenosine diphosphate, is going to be the low charge or low energy form. We will attach that last phosphate group and it's going to form ATP or adenosine triphosphate. And that's the high energy form or the fully charged battery that we store for walking, talking, thinking, blinking at a moment's notice. Okay. So that way we don't have to rely on eating to provide us with the energy. We eat when we can. We store that food in the form of energy in those bonds of the ATP molecule so that we can get to it whenever we need it. Now, this is not your only source of energy throughout your body. This is the biggest form of energy, but there are also other carrier molecules. One of the primary examples we'll go ahead and talk about is NADP plus, which goes ahead and gets turned into NADPH. You should notice that NADP plus is a cation, which means it's a positive anion, and as such, you can transport electrons to allow the photosynthetic reactions to take place. So we will go ahead and take NADP plus two electrons and hydrogen ions to go ahead and manufacture NADPH. So NADPH is the full high energy form, the charged battery, and NADP plus is the spent or used form of the NADPH. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to really focus on ATP because that's most of the energy your body's going to use. So the energy released during respiration, which we'll go ahead and talk about on Friday, is not used directly by the cells. Okay. We're going to take the energy from our food and use it to instead make ATP, which your body then stores until it actually needs it. The ATP then supplies the energy for all the processes that we need for life. Some key processes we use include movement. Okay. That includes opening, closing your eyes, reading the screen like you're doing just now. This also includes walking, exercising of different types for chemical reactions. So, anytime your body needs to break things down or build things up in terms of an endergonic or an exergonic reaction, and to grow, which is much more important for you guys. The only growing I'm doing is going ahead and getting thicker, um, but you get the idea. So this is the structure of your ATP molecule. Now the ATP molecule is going to go ahead and be broken right here at this particular junction, okay, between the second and third phosphate groups. So we go from ATP, adenosine triphosphate, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to break this bond right here. This is the high energy bond that's going to yield all of our energy. When you do this, you are now going to form ADP. So ATP is made when adenosine diphosphate with two phosphate groups is then bonded to a third phosphate using the energy released from glucose, your food source, at the mitochondria during cellular respiration. This is going to primarily carried out through what's called the Krebs cycle. Again, don't worry about this because we will talk about it more again on Friday. Okay. And the conversion from ADP is done to ATP. Now, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for the help of enzymes. And hopefully, you remember that enzymes are a type of protein. And I hope you're beginning to realize just all the really important things that proteins do to go ahead and keep us functioning. So let's go over this one more time. We start out with the ADP molecule. So again, the adenosine and 2 phosphates. Here's your little lonely phosphate over here. We're going to go ahead and attach this up to these other ones to create another bond. When we do that, we are then forming our ATP molecule. Now, where does that energy come from? So that energy is actually coming from cellular respiration. It comes in to go ahead and create that bond, but it can only do this in the presence of enzymes. And when it's finished, we end up with our ATP, which again now has 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups. And here is that ever important bond between the second and third phosphate that we get all of our energy from. Okay, guys, so I hope you guys got what you needed to out of this. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourselves. So long.